This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
The Alien and Sedition Acts.
Is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center.
Left of Black is taking a brief hiatus from live broadcasting, but we are very happy to present a conversation that we had in October of this year with brander and legendary advertising agent, recording industry insider, Steve Stoute. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, and this is Left of Black. This, of course, is the John Hope Franklin Center for Interdisciplinary and International Studies. It's named after the legendary historian John Hope Franklin, whose office is still downstairs. And we're very happy to have been, for the last 2 years, collaborating here with the staff at the John Hope Franklin Center to produce Left of Black. We were given a marvelous opportunity. Steve's team at Translation, contacted us in August and was interested in coming to Duke. They asked for Duke specifically. We found some dates and thought this would be a great opportunity, not only obviously to film an episode of Left of Black, but also to have a live conversation. Of course, we're doing a live stream. You can follow the conversation on Twitter at #DukeLive or #LeftofBlack. My name is Mark Anthony Neal. I'm a professor of African and African American Studies here at Duke University and the host of Left of Black. And we're happy to be joined this evening by Mr. Steve Stoute, whose reputation precedes him, both in terms of his work within the recording industry and most recently his work as a branding guru, really, branding expert through his company Translation.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So one of the things I want to start with, you have a new book that came out called The Tanning of America. Mm-hmm. And in the book you make an argument that what we've seen over the last 25 years and about the same time of the ascent of hip hop as kind of a mainstream part of American culture, this tan generation. Folks who don't necessarily see race the same way previous generations of folks saw race, but have common values, common desires, most of it packaged around hip hop and urban culture. Talk a little bit about this concept of tanning.
So it dawned on me, before I got into the advertising business, I was in the record business for many years. I ran record companies. That's what I did for a living. And as I transitioned from the record business to the advertising business, you know, being culturally curious was always something that was very important to me. Paying attention to the way people shop, paying attention to what caused trends to happen. It was just something that I've always taken notice of. And one day I was at a show, I was in Cleveland and Jay-Z was performing. And I looked in the audience and I realized that not only was it filled with African Americans and Caucasians and Latinos and Indians and, you know, multi different races, but they would all dress similar and dance to the music in a very similar way. And I was like, does anybody understand what this means? It wasn't about the music itself. It was about the culture that hip hop brought behind the music that caused everyone to join in at a much deeper level, at a much more invested level than just listening to a song and liking it. I always say that the music was the Trojan horse and the culture came out that horse. And if you look at the trends that have taken place over the last 25 years, if you looked at the amount of shared values that's been created around lifestyle over the last 25 years, you would be pretty much hard pressed to disagree with that hip hop culture played a very strong role in bringing that to happen. In fact, I go as far as saying in the book, because of the way in which it organically brought people together, that hip hop has done more to bring people together than anything since the great Dr. Martin Luther King.
You go back to what you almost describe as a foundational moment in this tanning movement. 1986, Run DMC, the Raising Hell album. and the track My Adidas. And you tell the story that you got from Russell Simmons about how they simply wanted to make a song about traveling around the world.
Yeah.
And talking about where their Adidas had gone, and suddenly the light goes off. What's there to keep from linking this movement of young black folks, hip hop, to mainstream marketing? And Adidas didn't quite know what to do with it at that point in time. What did you think were some of the things that were keeping companies like Adidas and other companies from recognizing the power of hip hop to get them to be able to reach broader audiences?
Well, I don't want to go as far as saying they didn't know what to do with it at the time.
Okay.
Adidas had 3% market share in America at the time, Adidas, which is the way they would like to formally pronounce their name. And 3% market share, and they weren't doing really well in the United States. There was a specific SKU, an item, that was doing well, and it was growing out of the Northeast, and it had no true marketing agenda around it. It was just one SKU that was performing very well. So as a result, somebody, and I speak about this a lot in the book, about the culturally curious, people who want to find out more, people, and I talk about lovers versus haters and the way you accept culture and deal with it. Someone who was a lover of culture and curiosity came over to the United States and went to this concert to see why these guys, this Run DMC's name kept coming up as a reason why this particular shell-topped shoe was selling. He went to the show, and Run proceeded to perform the song My Adidas, but before he did it, he asked everyone, he took off his shoe and held it up in the air. And lo and behold, 18,000 people had that shoe on, and they held it up simultaneously. As a result, immediately after the performance, they were offered a deal for $1.5 million to endorse Adidas. Now, why that's a pivotal moment is because, for a fact, a German global company in 1986 realized that a fledgling art form about a song that had a song could actually move culture and create contagious consumer behavior, where they would actually purchase the sneaker as a result of what these men were discussing and what these artists in the song discussed. For that to get on the radar screen of corporate America, specifically a global company at that time, was a seismic shift in the perception of the art form pre and post that evening.
Right.
And that's why I call that the pivotal moment.
Yeah. You got your start in the industry as a roadie for Kid and Play.
That's a guy who's on the road, who's checking you in the hotels and making sure the amount of bags you walk in with and the amount of bags you walk out with.
And
they
shout
call
out
a roadie.
Shout out to Christopher Martin, who's here in Durham these days. What did you see about the possibilities of the industry? I mean, and you tell this story about trying to explain to your parents, what your new career move was going to be. What was it about hip hop at that moment in time that you thought it was something that you could build a sustainable career?
Well, what I was doing at that time, and that's the most important thing about me coming down here and why I like speaking to college students, because I'm faced with the same decisions that I was faced with the same decisions that most of you guys are faced with today. And it's about, choosing your major at life, really. It's really not just choosing that degree that you're gonna get, but you're choosing your major at life at 18, 19 years old. And it's a very specific and tough decision, whether you're gonna go to college or not, or what you're gonna study in college, and what are you gonna do with that, and hopefully there's something at the end of the rainbow of that decision. It's probably one of the first things that you have to decide that you have to be very confident about, because you're gonna be living with that decision for a very long time. I decided to get into the record business. I was bouncing around college to college. I know I didn't have the perseverance and the patience to go to college for 4 years. I don't know why. I still don't have the answer to that. But I didn't want to disappoint my parents, so I would keep going to different colleges. I went to 5 over the course of 2 years in order to make them feel like I was moving forward with the scholastic agenda, but I was actually moving colleges to get closer and closer to what I wanted to do, and searching for myself. And the record business at that time was very opportunistic. They were looking for guys who could understand what was going on in the streets and finding the artists and finding who was credible and not. And at the exact same time, had enough business acumen to work within the confines of a record company and, you know, contain this art form and bring it to a realization of a business strategy. And, you know, my entry into that was being a roadie for Kid and Play. So that's how I got into business initially. And when I talk about these decisions in life, it's very important. You know, what you guys are going to go through right now is a very serious thing, because it's not about, you know, there was a time in life where you would say, well, I'm going to college, and that automatically meant something. Then there was a time in life where it was like, I'm going to college, and this is the college that I'm going to, and that automatically said something. You guys are living in a day and age where the college, the fact that you went to college, and the fact that you studied something specific in college doesn't truly guarantee you anything coming out of it. And that forces you to be much more resourceful. And resourceful was something that a lot of college students yesteryear didn't have to deal with. They came out, and the entrepreneurs or guys who didn't go to school, they were very resourceful, trying to figure it out. And it was always that school of hard knocks versus the college-educated student. You now have to see this sort of blend of skill sets of, I have a college degree and I have the discipline that it takes to be, to go through 4 years or 6 years, or whatever it is that you decide on doing. And yet I still have the resourcefulness of a person who didn't go to college and have street smarts and understand how to apply that to business and everything else. So you guys have a very tough road ahead of you with that. And you know, and in reading the book, when I left the record business, I was 29 years old. I had the most coveted job in the record business. I was the president of Interscope. Everybody wanted that job. Everyone, every act, you think of it, the act was on Interscope.
And name some of those acts for, you know, for students who don't remember.
They remember. They remember. But it was Dr. Dre's. It was Death Row was there prior to me when I first got there. But it was Dr. Dre's label, Aftermath. It was Eminem and his entire movement. It was the Rough Riders and their entire movement. Then it was the rock acts that were huge, Limp Bizkit and Marilyn Manson and Gwen Stefani and No Doubt. It was just a tremendous, powerful roster of artists who kept pushing culture forward. The record company was built on finding the artists that were moving culture forward. That's why all those artists was there. It's not an accident that there was Marilyn Manson, and then it was Eminem, and then it was Dr. Dre, and then, you know, 10 years later it's Lady Gaga. That's what the label is built on. People who move the culture forward. So to be running that record company is a very coveted job. And I decided to make a left and go be a partner in an advertising agency, and then build my own advertising agency after that. And there was a certain amount of courage in following your passion that you have to do. I always say, and I really believe this, about your passion, what you tell yourself every single day, the thing that you could live with, that if you don't follow your passion, then what you are really doing is betting against yourself. You are saying that I don't believe myself, I'm gonna believe something else that's coming from somebody else's perspective, and that is a bad bet. You can't live that bet out. You can live with the decision that you make. And I think that if you follow yourself, if you do anything and you're persistent about it, you will get to the finish line, if you believe in it. That book took 3.5 years to write. I really believe in this topic. There's not that many, I can't tell you I'm gonna write another book, because I don't know if there's another topic that I'm passionate about that I'm willing to put 3.5 years of investigation and interviews and everything into. That topic is it now. Wow, what a perfect time. The census data came out. Proves that theory all the way out. 1 in 7 marriages are now interracial. The proximity of the diverse nature of this country has come to realization. No longer is it California and Florida where Latinos are growing at the highest rate. In fact, they're growing at a higher rates in North Carolina than they are in Florida at this point, in Illinois. And what does that mean? That's proximity. What does proximity mean? You're putting people in closer environments. That leads to relationships. That leads to communities being built differently. That's how we look at one another. That's how we get along with one another. The fact that that realization came out and the book came out at this time is just the way the world works. That's why I think the book is being accepted and people are responding to it in such a positive way. The timing is right. But I didn't know that. I just followed my passion. That wasn't anything I predicted. I didn't know when I left the record business that all of a sudden MP3s were gonna happen and people were gonna start taking music illegally, and then all of a sudden I look like I made a brilliant decision. No, I just followed my passion. So I really want you guys, and I urge you, I hope when we finish today that somebody has decided that they were on the fence on something, and because of this visit and me coming down here to speak with Mark, that you decided to follow that dream and follow that passion of yours and go forward.
One of the things I love about the book, you're a great storyteller. And one of the things that's been the strength of Steve Stoute's career is that you see relationships and potentials in relationships where most folks don't, whether that be the companies that you're helping to rebrand or even artists in this regard. And you tell some stories in the 1990s about companies that were risk takers in some ways. You mentioned Sprite and the Obey Your Thirst campaign, and using not Hammer, right? Not a top-notch artist, right? Someone who was commercially moving units, but someone like Grand Poobah,
Yeah.
right? Or Pete Rock and CL Smooth, who had a certain kind of street cred. But also you tell this great story about the Gap and LL Cool J.
Yeah.
LL Cool J, of course, had invested in FUBU. The Gap reached out to him as they were trying to rebrand their image. And he pulled a typically
You're
hip-hop
telling the
move.
story, man.
Well, yeah.
How many guys, can I get a show of hands of people who read the book? Okay, good. No, that's great. So at least I'm not saying the story and you guys are ready.
No.
That wouldn't be so cool.
And folks in the audience, those who got here early enough, got their own copy of it already.
Perfect. So here it is. So this is great. So 96, circa 96. LL Cool J is asked to be hired by the Gap to be a spokesperson for them. At the same time, LL had already invested money into this clothing line called FUBU, For Us, By Us, this line that started. So they was always like, I was in the record business at that time, and I had worked on that album that had like Hey Lover and Doing It Well, and I'd worked on that album specifically. So that was the album in which he was wearing FUBU in all those videos. I would always see the FUBU guys around because they were coming to the set making sure that he was wearing the clothing and promoting it at all times. So Gap asked to hire him, and they put him in a commercial. So LL shows up to the Gap commercial, and the commercial is a white psych, right? Gap ad, just standing in front of a white background. And it was about poetry, I think. He was just speaking to camera, like a cappella, talking to camera. And he was talking about his Gap and his clothing. But in the middle of the commercial, he decides to say, For Us, By Us on the low. And he has the FUBU hat on in the commercial.
Right.
And he says this, and it's like a dog whistle for everybody who understood the art form at that time. Like, wow, he just said, For Us, By Us on the low with the hat on. And this made it on national television. They didn't have anybody around them that knew anybody else around them, that knew anybody that could say, yo, that hat he has on is for a company called FUBU, which is not Gap, And For Us, By Us is the name of it. And he said on the low to let everybody know that you don't know that he's wearing his hat. And he's saying it on our paid commercial time. And it's funny. But what happens is, when something culturally takes off really fast, when I talked about songs, versus the cultural impact. So I said hip hop brought the music, was the Trojan horse for the culture. They bought LL Cool J, the guy with the Q ratings, celebrity. They had no idea what he was saying, even on the records, why they even hired him. They seen him sell 3 million records, said, oh, let's use him. But they didn't know what he was talking about. We see this happen all the time, where as the art form kept growing, it was growing so fast that people wanted to enter it, but they were entering it with no information at all. They were just buying the popularity, but they didn't understand what was really taking place underneath the popularity. And that led to circumstances like this. There's other things that happen where, you've seen MTV show videos. I don't know if you guys quite caught all of this, but there were moments where guys were just blatantly saying things that should have been bleeped out, that weren't bleeped out, because no one knew what they were saying. Right? No one had any idea of what they were saying. I mean, I've heard Jay-Z promote so much drugs in his music videos because he would call it different words, and by the time they figured out what the words were, he was already on the next album. I mean, that's just the way it is, Yeah. So, but it's very important to know that when culture takes off that fast, people pay attention to the popularity, but they don't pay attention to the sort of the engine or the nuts and bolts of it. And because they don't do that, a lot of things gets missed or lost in translation as a result.
And that's partially what your job is, right? You're the expert, the expertise that comes into the room to help make sure that translation takes place.
I hope so. When I started the company in 2004, I was shocked that the word translation was available. I mean, I couldn't believe that. I'm like, no one picked up on this?
Yeah.
And to go around and tell companies and Fortune 500 companies that I'm going to be the guy who translates what's taking place in culture and help you promote your brand to the consumer in a culturally authentic, connective way. Back in 2004, people thought I was out of my mind. And the reason why they thought I was out of my mind was because they didn't realize they came from a generation where you could push culture down. You could just force a message on you. And if you keep spending the money on airtime on that, all of a sudden you would create this consumer likability as a result. But there was a shift taking place where your generation specifically had so much information and so much access to avoid being told what to do that you started navigating around that push down message. And they started seeing a lack of return on investment on the money they were spending to try to get their point across. You got to remember, man, in the 70s, there was 3 channels. It was CBS, NBC, and ABC.
WPIX in New York.
And those were local affiliates, right? Yeah. So because you got 3 national networks, you think it's hard to force a message on people? If you just buy all 3 networks, you got them.
Yeah.
That's why jingles were all they were trying to get you locked in because you had nowhere to go anyway. You had no escape. Cut the TV on and get brainwashed by the advertising. And we're going to get in jingles and we're going to do everything to get you bought into it. I'm not saying that's wrong, but that was the sign of the times. And guys who came from that generation who still had their jobs, so that just existed even when the internet became prevalent. They didn't realize that they couldn't get away with that any longer. They were doing that through the birth and growth of cable and continuing to do that even with the internet. And your generation was the first generation that said, no way, we have options here. You can't just do this. You have to be able to speak to the consumer on consumer terms. You can no longer speak to the consumer on terms that you predetermined. And in 2004, when I started the company and I wanted to build an agency that helped companies do that and speak to the consumer in the right way, it was a very tough beginning. And through persistence and through making sense and then building case studies, I got a chance to build a company and be able to sit with you lovely people today. The big break came for me when I was asked to work on McDonald's I'm Loving It in 2004. And McDonald's wasn't doing so great at that time, and everyone had a lot of downward pressure because of the Atkins craze. And there was a film that came out that was about Super Size Me was the name of the film. And people were down on McDonald's. And I'm Loving It was their campaign, that was their first global campaign. And the intention was to get the entire company re-energized, give a different consumer-facing effort. It was the first time they said, you know what, we're gonna embrace lifestyle. So if you look at the early I'm Loving It commercials, the initial spot, they were showing like tattoos and a mohawk, and they didn't show burgers, they didn't show the food. They were showing sort of snapshots of life. And it was the first time they did that because they were coming from that same generation where they would show you a steamy burger and show it to you a bunch of times, and all of a sudden you got, the urge to go get one. And that no longer worked, and they realized that, and they picked up on it, and they made that shift, and they brought me on. And when they brought me on, I would say they're still my client today, and it definitely changed the trajectory of my company and my agency.
Talk about Hewlett-Packard, HP, and those series. First, the Gwen Stefani, the camera.
So HP was that client came very early on, and they were going through a very difficult time as well. I wanted to try to move very early. I realized that photography, before everybody got smartphones, right? You're taping me now, right? Before everybody got smartphones, it was cool. All of a sudden, it was a time where it was funny, where you'd see people walking around with cameras and you just automatically assume they were tourists. Like, I know this sounds crazy, but like walking around with a camera meant that you were coming from another country and you were a tourist. Why would you walk around taking pictures of anything, right? And when social media started gaining traction, of course, people started taking pictures of everything. And cameras started becoming in vogue for just everyday lifestyle. So what I wanted to do was quickly get HP into this lifestyle camera, right? Because there was a period of time where it was all about Canon and Kodak and Nikon, and that was like photography excellence, but that was like the photographer's camera. Pre the smartphone, there was no lifestyle camera. So I wanted to put HP in that business. I seen that trend happening early. So what I did was they had an existing line of cameras. Gwen Stefani was launching her Harajuku and Lamb clothing line. And I did a line of designer cameras for them. And it was limited, and we sold the cameras right where you could buy it online, but we also sold the cameras where she was selling her clothing. So we were now taking cameras and breaking their traditional distribution of tech stores or photography stores and selling them in the likes of Kitson, which was a boutique, it's still around, but a boutique a clothing store that was on Robinson in Los Angeles. And because you had this thing, it brought a cachet around the camera, and we sold we made 5,000, we sold them quickly. And they were like very shocked that people were buying cameras, but they were buying those cameras because they wanted to use them as sort of lifestyle gadgets, which was the beginning of this whole uploading photos and using photography for social media tools. It transitioned, it kept going, sorry.
That's okay.
As we were trying to get the brand relevant and cool, to a campaign they came to me with. It's a great agency out of San Francisco called Goodby, who had the idea for this. And it was about shooting a personality between their neck and their torso, but you don't show their face. And they were gonna do the spot and shoot it with Robert Redford. and Drew Barrymore. And I completely said no. We're not doing that. We're not launching it with those people. We're going to launch it with Jay-Z. And we launched the spot with Jay-Z, and it was all about his hands, and he showed all the things that he was doing as a retired artist at that time. And that spot went on to win many awards. And I think that that was a big part of, bringing HP back to pop culture relevancy, those two decisions that was made during that time.
You take some credit, and rightfully so, for helping to push the iPod into the world by leveraging your relationship with Interscope and artists and the product placement of an iPod in 50 Cent's PIMP video.
Yeah, I'll talk about that. So I don't take, so Jimmy Iovine, who is my mentor and a very dear friend of mine, and a guy I worked with for many years when I was at Interscope, he really, for the record business, wanted to stop the illegal process of downloading music. In fact, he went to the chairman, he was going around to all the tech companies trying to get meetings with these guys, and he met with the chairman of Intel. And the chairman of Intel told him in the meeting, he said, Jimmy, some businesses aren't meant to last forever.
Talking about the recording industry.
Yeah, well, you know how hard it is to tell somebody who's doing that for the last 30 years? So when Jimmy met with Steve Jobs, at the first time they were launching the iPod, it was a guitar up there. It was a billboard, white billboard with a guitar. And what Jimmy had said to him was that, kids don't look at guitars the way you think they do. That's not it any longer. That's not the instrument that signifies music. It's not a guitar anymore. This generation doesn't see it that way. And it was all about and then they changed the key art, but then Jimmy kept on going further, and it was about product placement in music videos to make the product live within popular culture. And Steve Jobs actually went to the PIMP video shoot. And 50 Cent had the product, if you guys remember it, and the cadence at what he did. And everybody, if you look at all the videos around that time, if you just go, whatever the 50 Cent video was, right? You guys want to do some, quick assignment. You just pull up the video, find out the day it came out, or that period, and pull up every Interscope artist around that time, and you'll see iPods in every video. And that's how they started seeding it, and that started the contagious consumer behavior. In fact, they did the same thing recently with Beat headphones. Exact same thing. Same company, Interscope, product placed the Beat headphones everywhere. Everybody wants them. Did the same thing back then with the iPod.
When you talk about that 50 Cent shoot, and this idea that you can't live 50 Cent's lifestyle, but you can own an iPod, and you use this term often throughout the book, the idea of hip hop being aspirational. And it's a term
the culture's aspirational.
The culture's aspirational, right? And it's something that comes up again, I think, with the release of Watch the Throne. How would you place Watch the Throne within this broader cultural movement of aspiration, particularly given what's happening economically at this time?
Well, I think that when I speak about aspiration, I'm speaking about not only hip hop culture, but I think generally oppressed people or people who come from a lineage of oppression look for tangible goods to say that I've made it, that I'm on my way. Right. They look for badges that do that. So it's not only African Americans, but a lot of Asians would run to Louis Vuitton just as fast. And I'm not even using whatever the brand is, a brand that signifies that you made it. It's a badge, right? It's an achievement. You can overdo it. I'm not police, I know that too. But that's what the brands are there for. That's what luxury brands make. They make people feel like they're on their way. They make you feel good, that you're doing the right thing. You can afford that. In moderation, it's the right thing to do.
Right.
What I think Watch the Throne does as an album is there's an aspect of those artists' lives that they've taken you through the beginning through The Wire, or Jay-Z talking about candidly about living in Marcy projects, and you've followed these artists for the last 10 years. They've been telling you a story over the last 10, 12 years. So you know who they are. You know where they came from. You've seen them go from the beginning to the end and grow as artists. And in Watch the Throne, I really like the fact that I think that they've dialed it back. I love songs like Made in America. Mm-hmm. I think that song speaks to a lot of different things that's much deeper and much more enriching than just bling and having money, and it's aspiration about the way you want to live your life. Murder to Excellence, another song on that album, same type of thing. So I think the messages gets much more deep and more high def about what life really is about. So, and I'm saying that coming from a very pure place, because I know that the art form is getting carried away. And I know that people are saying a lot of different things and taking advantage of the fact that it's so popular now, but that's what's gonna happen. When things get, there was a time when the artists couldn't get on the radio. And I speak about this in the book. Mm-hmm. There was actually a time where you would go around and R&B stations that had African American owners primarily would say, you won't hear hip hop on this station. They were actually proud to say they wouldn't play the art form. Forget pop stations. Forget that. Then all of a sudden, the art form started getting so popular, the undercurrent. See, local radio stations are on the front line of media, because if they're not playing the records that the kids want to hear, then the local car dealer is not buying that station's advertising anymore. So they feel it immediately. They feel the immediate impact of not entertaining or getting listeners to the local station. So when they weren't playing hip hop and they was getting played at 1 a.m. on a college station, and they started seeing these shifts, they all of a sudden had to start playing it. But then the pop station started playing a little bit of it too. They realized they wanted some of that action. Then they created this entire format called Churban. Crossover urban, Churban. And that was a good, comfortable place for hip hop music to live. And the Churban stations had wider bandwidths than the R&B stations primarily. And that's how a lot of white kids started to hear hip hop. Between that and this other, there was another medium that was out in the early 90s called The Box, where you could order the videos and dial them up and get them and watch whatever you wanted. It was like a jukebox of videos. And a lot of kids who had heard of an artist, but they could never see it on MTV, or they didn't have BET or watch BET, would order it on The Box. And those mechanisms allowed hip hop in these 4-minute tutorials, because that's what these music videos really were. They were tutorials. They were much deeper than just an entertaining piece of content. They taught people a lot about how to dress, how to dance. They were much deeper than just, a playback of the song, so to speak. And in the book, I talk about this. So you see where the story arc goes. It goes from Run DMC in 1986 and an Adidas executive coming over because he was culturally curious, to how this art form and this culture got in your household and allowed for a generation to see each other through these shared values that hip hop music played a big role in. And I tie all of that to the truth of why there was a generation that felt that it was okay to vote for an African American president. And I draw that line straight through. And I do it hopefully in a very entertaining way. I do it in a way that's profound, because you know the stories. You just never seen them all tied together.
You mentioned in the book watching the returns in 2008 with Jay-Z and Beyonce. What kind of advice?
Watching the what?
The election returns in 2008.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
How would you advise President Obama now in terms of rebranding himself for 2012?
Well, I was on Piers Morgan the other night, and in the pre-interview, they said, we're not going to ask you any political questions. You know, look, I'm a marketer, okay? You know, I'm okay in front of the camera. The last thing I want is like a guy that skilled at interviewing asking me on national television without telling me he's going to ask me that exact same question. He goes, what would you do? And you know, it's really funny, and I hope this doesn't rub anybody the wrong way. Please bear with me. News, propaganda news, they have the same responsibility to get ratings like a television show. So I had a dinner party at my house, and I had everybody there. I had the Gayle King and Soledad O'Brien and the head of ABC, the executive producer of ABC News, and they're all sitting around. It just happened to turn into one of those dinners. I don't know why. It wasn't premeditated. And we started talking about news, and they were arguing that the local news actually at times gets better ratings than Jay Leno, the evening news, or David Letterman, but yet those guys get higher ad rates than them. And it was odd to me that the news people were speaking about ratings. So I'm like, this is odd. That means you do things for ratings. So forced me to ask the next question, like, what gets ratings? This is crazy. The number one thing that gets ratings is missing white girls.
Big surprise, right?
Like, it beats terrorism. Because you got the elongated story. You got the search for, finding the perpetrator, the trial, the whole story. Missing white girls, they love that. Now, they don't love that, but that's the lead item that, you know, let me just clear that up. You know, that keeps people engaged, like locked in, you know? So I take this story back to this question you just asked me. For some reason, I believe, and it's not even speaking about the interviewer at all or his beliefs, they want to get African Americans on tape saying negative things about Obama. Right. I don't know why. I don't think it's because they're saying, look, you know, I don't agree with it, so now he doesn't agree with it either. I don't even think that's the case. I just think that it's sensationalized for America to see. Even African Americans don't agree with an African American. And it's so odd, because so what? So what?
Yeah.
Did you vote for him because he was African American, or did you vote for him because he was the right man for the job? And I voted for him because he was the right man for the job. If you looked at the options that existed, I think everybody made the right call. So, rebranding himself. Very early on, my point of view is, I think the first thing he did was when the Guantanamo Bay decision of closing that. And I felt like that was certainly not the right thing to do to start the introduction of your term. His promise was huge, is huge. And unfortunately for him, I don't think he did a great enough job of articulating the depth of the crisis that he inherited. That crisis took 8 years minimum to create. And he inherited that, and we're all staring at him that he didn't fix it in 2.5 years, and that's unfair. And I think that he needs to find a way to say what I just said, you know, with his cadence and his style and his charisma and everything else. But I think everybody needs to understand that there's a light at the end of the tunnel for his plan, and that he inherited a mess that he's really doing everything he can to fix. A. B. The world was in fear since 9/11. 10 years. The world was in fear, not New York City, not just America. I am talking about London, China, France, everything. This man, Osama bin Laden, had the entire world in fear. Because if he decided that you were next, there was nothing you can do about it, and that was the belief that the world felt. Obama single-handedly removed that fear. And I don't think that he took the victory lap he deserved for that. They spent a lot of time focusing on his health bill and not enough time focusing on what he did to save the world and remove that fear. So I think that in rebranding him, I think that we need to be reminded quickly of what this man has accomplished, what he has done, the hope and the confidence that he's put back in the country that the country had lost. And we can sit here and talk about him, and it's so easy to criticize somebody who has the top job. But those same people who are criticizing that man who has the top job were the same people who voted for Bush again. So what do they know?
You mentioned that you can draw a line from this early moment with Run DMC, 1985, 1986, to Obama's election. Could you continue to draw that line to Occupy Wall Street, particularly in terms of the role that the tan generation has played?
The tan generation, let me just deal with the tan gen. I think those are two different topics, Occupy Wall Street and the tan generation and the millennials and where it goes from here. We're dealing with, the numbers come out like in 2020, there's going to be more African American, Latino babies than Caucasian babies in America. By 2050, we'll probably completely be a raceless society where you look around and you won't tell what anybody is via their skin color, that everybody will be mixed with something else. They estimate around 2050 for that. And I know you hear numbers like that, it's like, oh, that can't be true. It really is true. I mean, 1 in 7 marriages are interracial. That's marriages. Forget sex and relationships that didn't work, right? We're there. We are there. And as long as we keep sharing our cultural codes so that we allow each other the elasticity to visit one another and not have any preconceived notion as a result, you're going to get this tanning effect continue to get deeper into the psyche of Americans and generations around the world. Tanning is a process that we're going through. It's a mental process of a mental complexion that's all being blended together. And then we will be tanned, from my point of view, right? So it goes and it ends. It's not something that continues forever. Occupy Wall Street I don't know if this approach is making a difference. They're speaking. By the way, they're speaking for you. They're saying there ain't no jobs, man. This ain't right. These guys are making so much money. Now, this is all the stuff, again, that Obama inherited, This is all the wages and the Wall Street guys and the CEO pay packages and all that stuff that he inherited. Now, whether my point of view on it, whether it's fair or not fair, is not even the point. That's what these guys down on Wall Street are fighting over. That they can't feed their families, they can't find jobs, and yet these guys are getting tremendous bonuses and making all this money off the people. And they want some, level of fairness or understanding so that, they have a chance to get a piece of that, or that some rules change so that it becomes an opportunity for them to get a job and grow their careers and earn money to feed their family. I just think the tactics are a little, it's going to get violent. There's violence. People are getting arrested. It's not necessarily coming across as organized. It's not coming across as a positive thing. It's coming across as protesters being angry and occupying parks and doing a bunch of things to cause issue, but not necessarily, I haven't heard, has anybody heard any positive statement or argument from what they're protesting that we could all say they have a point of view? No, they're just standing there and showing that they're organized enough to occupy space. But I think that there needs to be something a little bit more organized from a statement that they're trying to make that they have to deal with, that the guys on Wall Street have to deal with, that the governments have to deal with, rather than them just occupying space, causing an issue.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.